Yeah. Okay, good morning, everyone. As you know, I've spoken about this class for a couple of weeks in the previous class. And what I'm going to do with this is really I want to highlight World War II is what we're going to talk about the most. However, what I want to suggest is that that war was a war about resources, about obtaining resources to feed a system, and the system was capitalism. Now, it's very important for me at the beginning of this to say that this is not an attack on capitalism. It's to put capitalism into a perspective. I think that the animosity that is often directed at capitalism is misplaced. I feel it should be placed on greed. There are many capitalists who are not greedy and who are generous and who have morals and all of that. But it's those who don't and are simply looking to expand their wealth who manipulate a system to accomplish their ends. So today I'm going to talk about capitalism. Then we're going to move into the new world, which we've talked about in previous classes, but it's important to understand the dynamics that are at play in opening the new world because it coincides with the capitalist system reaching a level of maturity and opening up paths for great wealth. Then we're going to talk about the resource wars, and that was the scramble for Africa because the Industrial Revolution had taken place, which now needs a lot of natural resources. And natural resources includes raw materials and labor. Then I want to talk about World War II, but I want to take it from a perspective of what takes place in the East. We've had many classes about what went on in the European theater, but not much really exposes what went on in the East. Mind you, World War II began in China, which contradicts what is often said about the beginning of World War II. So we're going to look at China, then we're going to look at Japan and what Commodore Perry began in 1853 in seeking ports for American trade is an attack on Japan, and it can be interpreted as an attack on Japan and how that played out. Then we're going to look at the Raj, India, and how the British Empire took over India and what was involved with that. We're going to come to the end and we'll look at the Nuremberg trials, which I think are very important. There's a great program on Amazon, I believe, might be on Netflix about Nuremberg, which is a dramatic representation of it that I think is very, very well done. And in our last class, I want to talk more about culpable Americans who escaped Nuremberg. Many business people were put on trial at Nuremberg and many convicted. However, their American counterparts who also aided and abetted the Hitler regime were not held accountable. So that's the layout of where the class will be going. And I'm sure you're tired of hearing me talk about this, but again, it starts with the transition from the hunter-gatherer world to agriculturalist. And when we become agriculturalist, It's referred to as the Neolithic age. And it's a really important point in American history because it represents a dramatic alteration of the human experience. A nomadic life transformed into a sedentary life, fixed on a spot. We became civilized in that process. This change allowed for food production to soar. And as food production soared, population soared with it. This graphic highlights population expansion from about 12,000 years ago. I'm sorry, yeah, 12,000 years ago to the modern day. And we can, if you look, we can see that at the about 12,000 years ago, we had 4 million people. And then around 17 million at the time of Abraham. Here's Abraham. So we go from 4 million to 17 million in, about 8 years, 8,000 years. So again, why I want to highlight that is that when I'm talking about this transition in the human experience, this isn't something that happens on Monday and everything is different on Tuesday. It happens over a very long period of time, moving people from the hunter-gatherer world to agriculture evolved over a painstakingly long period. And then we can get out to about 170 million people at the time of Jesus. And of course, today we're over 8 billion people. So food production and population coincided with each other. And what that meant is that you could not revert back, because if you're going to go back to the ways in which we survived 10 and 12,000 years ago, those techniques are not enough to produce the level of food that is necessary for the population. And just to give a kind of a broad timeline, is that our species, we emerge from the ape family. We break off from the chimpanzees because we think they're too aggressive. But we don't, I mean, remember, our brain is still at the level of the brain stem. So that's about 200,000 years ago, maybe 300,000 years ago. And then, but the modern Homo sapien kind of emerges about 90,000 years ago. And that's due to our brain developing more synapses, more capacity for thought. And so it's really because of our brain power that we discover that this food, the nuts and berries that we pick, that they have seeds, and that those seeds can be planted and can grow. And so we can take control over the source of food. Now, it's after we discover agriculture that this phenomenon that we know of as capitalism organically emerges. Doesn't happen overnight, but it happens slowly. Mind you, put yourself in the shoes of people who are just now starting to grow food. I may grow apples and I may grow a couple of other things so I can feed myself and I don't have to go and gather all of that. I also find that instead of killing the animals in a hunt, I can capture some of them and I can make them do work for me. Again, this is taking place over a very long period of time. But now I may, as my farming skills get better and better, I find apples is the thing that I can grow and I get a lot of them. But I need a more diversified set of food to put on my plate. And so I look at my neighbor, and my neighbor is growing oranges. And so we get together and we talk, and I then start trading with my neighbor. I give him some of my apples, he gives me some of her, her oranges. And so I understand what I mean is that trade starts, it emerges organically. And then another neighbor wants to get in on this, and they want to trade beans that they're making. Ultimately, we decide we're going to create a spot where all of us can meet and trade. There is the birth of markets. Markets, very important for trading products and services. And so that's the incipient stage of capitalism. Now, again, just put the timeline in order. Is capitalism and markets start to emerge? The people who are running their own kind of business, their own village, they become very powerful and they grow strong in being able to create defenses to protect against someone coming in and stealing the product of their labor. And so this now becomes, mind you, we talk about transforming to agriculture 10, 12,000 years ago. 4,000 years ago, the first empire appears. So again, it took 6, 7, 8,000 years for empires to come into being. The first empire being the Akkadian Empire about 4,400 years ago. And followed soon, quickly thereafter by Abraham, 2,000 years ago by Jesus, 800 years ago by Genghis Khan, and 500 years ago by Columbus. Mind you, according to Sven Beckert, the word capitalism doesn't come about until around the 19th century. So this phenomenon of trading and other things that go with capitalism has been around a very long time before it's given a name. Capitalism was the transitioning mechanism. It's the thing that allowed us to go from hunter-gatherer to agriculture and animal husbandry because it meant we could get multiple products. We could trade and we could sell our stuff. We could create wealth. And this is the thing that takes us from what people would call the caveman to civilized society. And what capitalism does is it provides the resources, the seed money for starting an enterprise. It gives you the money to buy the resources that you need for producing a product or a service. It helps you obtain the raw materials, labor, machinery, transforming resources then into a finished product or service. And then I can trade it on the market for something of value, whatever that may be, and collect enough in income to meet expenses and to earn a profit. That profit now can be used for the next seed money, for the next enterprise to develop. And that seed money may be something that I want for the purpose of obtaining a product or a service to help me in my business. So what we see happen is as we're developing this agricultural society, artisans, people who have skills, As you know, I have no skills, but there are people who do. It's like if you put a tool in front of me, I wouldn't know what the hell to do with it. But if you put a tool in front of George Weeder, he knows exactly what to do and he'll build stuff, right? And so the artisans are coming up with ideas for things that could help me in my agricultural production. They're making plows and other items like that. And so I think, yeah, I could use that. So I trade my excess food for the work of the artisan. And then I think, a lot of people could use what the artisan produces. And I say to that artisan, why don't you make more? You could sell a bunch of them. And the artisan says, well, I don't have the resources to get all the things I need to be able to produce it. And so I say, well, I've made some profit. How about I lend you money and get you started? It becomes the seed money, the capitalism, the capital needed for this next enterprise to grow. And so this is the capitalist system in its incipient stages. Markets emerged over thousands of years as humans were transitioning from hunter-gatherer to agriculturalists. Artisans come about. As agriculture blossoms, the person on the top creates defenses against attack by those in need of food. And then after an attack, whoever is the victor gets the spoils of the war. So some emperors think, I've got an army and I could use more spoils. So now I start to use those defenses to create empires. In the marketplace, in the beginning, barter was used as trade, but after not too long, forms of currency emerge to facilitate trade. And markets are definitely a key element of the capitalist system. Now, there are people who would say just let markets rule. Well, that markets don't rule. Markets are simply a place for trade, and it doesn't relieve government of governance that is necessary, which we will talk about. But so what we have is the market. The farmer brings, food to the market, sells it for a profit, pays back those who had lent that farmer money to obtain property and farming infrastructure, and retains what is left as profit. Soon, lenders enter the picture. Right? Bankers and stuff like that start to come about. Now, what you have is the emperor has all the power. How does the emperor get their power? Using their muscle, by attacking others, taking their stuff. Now, enterprise is coming about, and there are people who are lending. So, this capitalist system that is emerging becomes a force that can be of taking power from the emperor. Again, this doesn't happen overnight. It happens over a very long period. And lenders can later become investors, and then we get stock companies. The system of capitalism is not an ideology. It is merely a system for funding an enterprise, developing an infrastructure for the business to operate, repaying initial investors, and making enough profit to sustain the capitalist system. The Neolithic age humans were confronted with questions about how to survive. Mind you, I come out of being a hunter-gatherer. Now that's gone by the wayside. How am I going to survive? And so we have to reorganize the human experience. And that leads to the question of who will be the leaders. Mind you, during hunter-gatherer world, there wasn't a leader. Everybody had a task to do, but it was a very cooperative, egalitarian existence. We had survived for hundreds of thousands of years, traversing the landscape, searching for nourishment, establishing shelter for nighttime, starting each day the same way as the day before. Human experience changes to sedentary, centered on agriculture. It's a dramatic shift. Leaders emerge to fend off those who are seeking to steal excess production. And these leaders later evolve into emperors. And when they become emperors, they become abusive. And new ideas come about, raising questions of governance. What is the purpose of governance? And how may we select leaders? What is the task of governance? It's to establish boundaries of behavior. It's to create rules for the marketplace. It's to identify needs and a vision for meeting those needs. Mind you, there wasn't a governance. Before we become farmers, there's no governance. There's no ideology. None of it. And so we then ask, what is the purpose for governance? And we have, all these different isms: socialism, communism, oligarchism, dictatorship, but, all operate under a capitalist system. Mind you, if I'm looking at a communist country, they still have to make furniture. Someone has to make furniture. To make furniture, you got to get the resources. You got to get seed money, capital to make that happen. It doesn't matter if the capital is coming from the state or if it's coming from a private lender. It is capital, no matter what. And so when we look at socialism, communism, all of that, it has to have a capitalist system to work for the production of goods and services. Now, we've had many different forms of governance come about over time. We begin with the monarchies, the kings and the queens, ruled by decree. We have the oligarchy, which is the wealthy and the powerful. They create a cabal, and a cabal is where I extract oil, and I have to ship that oil to a place where I can transform it into gasoline and all of that. So I join with the shipping company. I join with the people who transform it into a finished product, and I'm in with all of them. We are one group, and we do things. It's like Rockefeller did with the railroads when he was creating his monopoly. He would negotiate a deal with the railroads to move his stuff. And part of the deal was, you won't give this price to any of my competitors. You'll charge them more. That's what ran them out of business, and he was there to take them over. Okay, democracy, elected by the populace. Communist governments have democracies. They have elections. They may be rigged, but then again, so may ours. We have dictators. Need I say more? We have parliamentary governments, which is a representative democracy where we elect the leaders who make the laws and the rules. We also have theocracies, where it's ruled by religious leaders, and autocracies, ruled by the strongman, which could also be synonymous with a monarch. So Becker, he argues that capital is not an ideology. but it can produce power as it moves through the system of enterprises, a constantly moving power, what he calls an archipelago of capital. Get this one up. And I found this to, if you think about it as these bubbles are capital and they move throughout the world, lenders, people who come together as bankers or investment companies that start moving capital. And capital can go into resources, it can go into companies that make a finished product, it can be service industries, it can be a lot of different things. But what it is it's constantly on the move. It can be putting money into labor. Remember, there was capital needed to be able to purchase enslaved people and ship them across the ocean. Is what we came to call the triangle trade. And so this phenomenon of capital money moves into many different environments. It's not just the corporatists who get it. It goes to many. Okay, let me get this going again. There we go. So, what then is the purpose of governance? Is it to serve the common good of whatever that political entity is? Is it to serve the successful, the wealthy, and the powerful so they can create and benefit the common good? Mind you, this is an argument that is a legitimate argument. I don't know which is better. All I'm saying to you is that these are two different concepts about what is the purpose of government. We have those on the very wealthy. We've reached the highest concentration of wealth in the top 1% than at any other time in American history. This is it. The top 1% has 90% of the wealth of the country. So, but again, you can argue that's a good thing because they then have the money to move capital into new enterprises and to constantly recreate the environment. You could argue that government ought not to be serving the wealthiest. Government should be there to balance out the wealthy who may be just serving themselves and to have governance that deals with the common good. And so when we look at the ideas that of socialism, communism, and all of that, that's an underlying philosophy for the purpose of governance. It's not, it's, it's again, you have a government. What's it there for? What's the underlying philosophy behind it? What are governance issues? Setting rules to protect against greed, against fraud, to protect the public health, defend to protect education, and to defend against exploitation. Get to my next one here. Okay. Now I want let me go. I have to take that out, go to that, go to here, and I'm going to say, I hope that's it. Now to hear from Sven Becker.
When you listen to political conversations, you think we live in an age of great scarcity. We somehow, for some reason, we can't provide everybody with housing. For some reason, we can't feed all of our children. For some reason, we can't provide everybody with high-quality healthcare. But especially in the United States, but also in much of the rest of the world, we actually can. But we somehow politically are not able to do so. And I think, history is important in seeing that you see a lot of terrible things happening in the past. And of course, how we got here was not always pretty. And we should remember that, and we should be aware of that. But we should also be aware of the possibilities of the world in which we live today. I think we're pretty far away from that, though. My name is Sven Beckert. I'm a professor of American history at Harvard University, and I'm the director of a center on the study of global history and the co-director of a center on the study of the history of capitalism. I think first and foremost, markets have existed, and this is, maybe the first thing that you learn from the study of history. Markets have existed, as far as we know, they have existed throughout human history. So they're not something that's peculiar to the contemporary moment, or let's say to the history of the past 200 years in the wake of the Industrial Revolution. But economic life has changed drastically in the past, let's say, 500 years. And if we just focus on the study of markets as such, we miss, I think, the historical specificity of the kind of economic change that happened on planet Earth in the past 500 years. And I think this specificity of the change in economic life is best identified as the rise and spread of capitalism. And, there are many things that can be cited when you look at the history of capitalism that illustrate the specificity of capitalism as a form of the organization of economic life that is different from other forms of the organization of economic life. But, the one that, most of us know about the best is probably that there has been an acceleration of economic growth. Definitely, since about the year 1800, that is completely unprecedented in human life. And I think that kind of revolution in economic life generated this increase in human productivity and its humans' ability to produce things. And this is specific to the capitalist revolution. Of capitalism.
In your book, you also chronicle how capitalism is mutable and has changed not only over time, but in place. So is there a simple answer to why capitalism has thrived under both liberal and illiberal regimes? And is there a difference in the type of capitalism that has thrived in each regime?
Yes, I mean, that is probably one of the most striking findings in the book, that I think capitalism is an economic logic that it has a core to it, as we discussed, but its institutional embeddedness, its political embeddedness, its reliance on various kinds of labor regimes, its very political territorial organization suggests to me that capitalism is fundamentally undogmatic. If you think about the 1750s, it draws to a significant degree on the labor of enslaved people in the Caribbean, but it can also, capitalism can thrive in a world in which people are paid wages. So there is a whole diversity of labor regimes. Capitalism can thrive in a world in which there are large monarchical states, or there are city-states, or there are empires like the British Empire, the French Empire, or there are large nation states like the United States, or again small city-states like Singapore today. So again, a whole variety of territorial arrangements go perfectly well with the expansion of capitalism. So the upshot of all of that is that I think capitalism is in really key ways is undogmatic, and in that way, capitalism is quite different from many of the people who write about capitalism.
But going back to markets, of course, markets.
Okay, well, I wanted to leave time for questions in case, I needed to explain different aspects of it, or so people can comment and talk about how they view, capitalism and the idea that it's just a system, it's not an ideology. So we're open.
Please use the raise your hand function and ask a short, succinct question so everybody can go, and then come back if you had a second question after everybody else goes. Lewis.
Sal, that was a very good review. It appears that capitalism basically started in Europe. We talk about a lot about of course, the Great Britain or the islands of Great Britain and so forth. What was happening in China? What was happening in, let's say, the Middle East? And we had some societies here in the Americas, to be Americas, like the Aztecs and the Mayans, that probably in the early days were more sophisticated than in Europe. Is that correct? So how does this all go together, and why do you think it started where it did, or was it also in other places?
Yeah, I think one of the things that strikes me about the book, The History of Capitalism, is that it gathers a lot of great steam in Europe, but it really has its origins. Of course, no one knows for sure. This is because we're talking, 10,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, where there isn't great documentation. But according to Beckert, you really have people coming together in China who are merchants, and they want new products, and they see people who are capable of making new products, and they begin lending money to them. So it kind of has, and why I show all those bubbles is that what Becker so brilliantly highlights is there become archipelagos of capital. So it's before we've had defined England and Ireland and China, or all those places had no names, right? We see that emerges these people who are in the market, merchants and others, who can see opportunities, and the opportunities need capital to get started. And they join together in different associations and become the lender to bring it up. And what you get is people, they lend money to a potential entrepreneur, and over time they say, instead of my lending you the money, how about you don't pay me back? And I just take a percent of what you earn over time, right? And this happens organically. It's not, if we grow into stock companies, but it starts without the name stock companies, without the name, hedge fund or whatever. I find it was what I find is fascinating. So these archipelagos pop up in many different spots.
Norman?
I don't know if that answers your question, Lou.
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize that one of the great things about Beckert's book is that when I studied history in college or graduate school, was all about American history and history in Europe, European history. Beckert's book is really about global history, and he emphasizes how markets and capitalism as far back as he could trace them, first developed in Asia and East Asia, Southeast Asia, and India, and then migrated through trade to Europe with trade that was going on with Asia. And I mean, modern capitalism has a genesis in Britain with the textile industry, and he also emphasizes how, as I think Lewis mentioned earlier, slavery was an integral part of the development of capitalism, not just in American slavery, but slavery around the world. And what was very important for it was cheap labor. And you still had to give food and housing to your laborers, but it was, in other words, how it was baked into capitalism was exploiting people. And then and I mean, the positive part of capitalism is concentrating capital so it could expand and expanding markets. Negative part is exploiting. I mean, slavery is just one example of that, but it happened around the world, and it happened. I mean, we know American slavery, but there was slavery in Asia. There was slavery everywhere, South America.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Norman. I mean, I know people look at this book and they see it's 1,300 pages. How could, I can't read all, but to me, again, I'm a nerd, but that it it is so rich with information that the more it's like there's new developments as you keep going along and you see these changes happening, and it's I like the bubbles because it's just bouncing around. And what you see is that capital now gets power that eviscerates the emperors. That it is and he talks about labor. You're right about. I had a student in a class I was doing about, I don't know, race relations, and she asked me. She said, "How come they only enslaved the chocolate people and didn't enslave any of the vanilla people?" I said, "They did." But the whole concept that white people were enslaved and Asians were enslaved was alien. And I mean, again, it's a commentary on what has been our educational system. But you're right. There was no place on the planet where you were free from being enslaved. As resources were developed or identified in different spots, as as humans morph around the world and they find, hey, this place has a lot of jute. Well, we can make a lot of money out of that. Let's enslave these people and have them produce it for us. So this is widespread and much more prevalent than I don't think I appreciated until reading.
And it also leads to monocultures. For the example of jute or hemp, so it's good for a small amount, and it's even better for a much larger amount. If you have the labor available to do it, go for it.
And then you get where they are trying when they're getting to mass production to make the wage earner subservient to the owner, so that they would tie they'd give them like health benefits or whatever, so they were locked in, but that the upper skilled people were treated differently. And for many, they wanted to get rid of the higher skilled people because they had a power that they could exert. It's quite, but to see that labor also develops a power through the capitalist system, where you're basically saying to the owner of the business, if you don't start paying us more money, we'll shut down your whole operation. So that shifting of power is what I find so terribly interesting.
And we're shifting the power to K, so go for it.
I think of capitalism as excess, like in personal finance, discretionary income. I think what you're saying is it's the whole process, whether there's a profit or not. It's the trade equality or inequality of the whatever process.
Yeah, Kay, let me say, let's say I want to start a nonprofit. I gotta get people to invest in my concept. So I get some money, seed money, to get started. That seed money is capital.
Profit from somebody else.
That's right. And that's a key point of Beckert's book, is that capitalism is it is a self-fulfilling. So we get successful, we make money, we now can invest money in something else. And I find that, of course, it's subject to abuse. You can have people who are simply going to take all the profits and keep it for themselves, right? And at the expense of exploiting people and that kind of thing. That's where governance comes in. But the system is just a system and not more than that.
Somewhere, though, there has to be a profit.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Right. And yeah, or you go bankrupt, you go out of business. Absolutely. Sure.
Okay. Thanks.
Ralph?
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Sal and everybody.
Hi, Ralph.
You mentioned the word greed early in your presentation. It's really a whole issue, and it's sort of there's such I guess, a evolutionary or biological throwback to that. The notion that we all have to have enough food to survive, and somewhere along the way we uh, developed this, inherited perhaps from lower forms of life, this notion that we need more than we actually have, and we start taking it from other people. We had a pair of rat terrier dogs, a female and a male, and the female was very dominant, and we had to separate them when we fed them because she would wolf hers down, then run and grab his, and um, and I think that kind of behavior is, I think that Jane Goodall saw that hoarding among some of the chimps. Uh, and I remember once Gordon Liddy, ex-Watergate criminal, had a talk show after his sometime later in his career, and somebody called and asked him about, well, how much profit should is good to make? How much profit am I justified in earning? And Liddy said, as much as you can goddamn get, you know, you charge as much as the market will bear and even more. And I remember thinking that that kind of gouging is so typical of in our system, and it's not well. Our capitalist system and our democratic system allows people to do that, but of course that's not really the best system for survival of the populace. And I think that remember sometime somebody used the term capitalism light, and I like that idea. A sort of a moderation of profit, and but then we get into regulation, and so many people are opposed to that. So I guess I'm making a statement, but I'm really, but it just seems to me, I'll sum up by saying it seems to me that there's this natural instinct in many Homo sapiens to uh, to get as much as possible, even including taking it away from others. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Ralph. I appreciate your comment. The look, I part of what I wanted to at least start a conversation about is that we have a lot of ideas that get confused. It is when we see greed that's egregious, we blame it on the capitalist system, and I think that's misplaced. I think we've gotten confused over what governance is about. It is if someone is abusing the capitalist system, it really is for government to set the rules, and they set the boundaries. What's acceptable? What isn't? Mind you, I don't want to sound like I'm a religious expert. I go to a lot of religion classes to learn about different faiths and what is the heart of their religion. And from those that I've been exposed to, none condemn wealth or someone being very successful. None do. The theme that comes from them is get as wealthy as you can, as long as everybody else's needs have been met. And when they're talking about needs, they're not talking about, extravagance. They're talking about basic ability to live. If you are very wealthy and there's massive poverty, that's not good, according to what the faiths are saying. But if you're very wealthy and everybody is living at least a good, solid, healthy life, we don't have a problem with that. So I find that very interesting. The issue of governance, we have people who will say they're communist, they're capitalist, they're socialist. That does not describe their government. It doesn't describe their governance. All of those things can be philosophical underpinnings of the type of government that they have. But fundamentally, government is there to serve the common good or structured to let the wealthy get very wealthy on the premise that they will then create more economic opportunities for everyone. In the final analysis, it doesn't matter, the affection should not be for a particular governance. It is what is the performance? or, do I have homeless people on the street? Do I have people who can't afford health care? That's a failure. And that, Sven Becker starts off saying, we have these things we can't do. We can't get rid of poverty. We can't get, he says, of course we can. Of course we can. And that to me is really the crux of it all. Yeah. And mind you, someone can say, look, I'm going to have a government to serve the common good, and I'm going to, the method of selecting the government will be a democracy, and everyone's going to have rights, and we're going to treat each other equally, and then go off and do the complete opposite. So just because someone proclaims themselves to say, I'm a communist country. Well, is there a specification for that you have to meet to be able to call yourself that? Can anybody say that Stalinist Russia was really a communist government? It's just a socialist where you have a broad safety net. You don't have a broad safety net when you kill millions of people.
Yeah.
Same with Mao. Mao becomes known as, a great leader of communism. I'm sorry, but to me, as I look at Mao, everything he did and his government did was the antithesis of what the original philosophers were saying should be the underpinning philosophy of government, communist government or socialist government.
Mhm.
So just because, it's important to understand that not all of them live up to the advertised product.
Thanks, Al.
Anybody else?
We have
Yeah,
Lou.
I had a 2 points. I think I know we're running near the time here, but maybe we can talk afterwards. I think Norm brought up a very interesting point, and that is the monoculture of plants. If you take a look what happened in the Caribbean, the islands were just stripped, and all they grew was sugar cane. If you look at tobacco, that's what happened here, like in Virginia. Or if you take a look at coffee, that's another one that just throughout the coffee growing parts of the world, it became a monoculture. So that was a direct results of this capitalism and deserves some discussion. But the other point was, and I'm sure you're going to bring this up, I think this started a real social differentiation. If you look at how New York City was built, for instance, with the pre income tax, and the money came pouring in, and the families started building the houses all in one, on the east side, whatever, Upper East Side, and had the differentiation of culture. So these are some, I think, other interesting points that are
Yeah.
good for discussion. I'm sure you're going to talk about them.
No, yeah. I mean, look, if we talk about El Salvador today, we think of street gangs and, illegal immigrants and blah, 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 blah. When you get into the history of it, this was a native, these were the people who migrated from Siberia across the Bering Straits and on down into Central and South America. Um, this was a lush land, lots of fruit. And, if you were a hunter gatherer, you had gone to heaven because that's it. It was all there, easy for the taking. People did well. They got along with each other and all of that. That is until the Spanish and others came along and they realized, look at this fertile ground. We can we can grow sugar here. We can grow cotton here or what, and then they wipe out all those fruit trees and all that. They take that all away, and then they enslave the people, right? And today we wonder why they want to kill us. I mean, come on. If you go back deep enough in history, you'll learn the reasons why. And um, yeah, I think it's a very good example. And there are many others that Beckert goes into in his account of the history of capitalism. But as I say, capitalism is not the sin. The sin is greed. And because look, there are many things that are done with capital that are good. I mean, I think we have more people who are responsible business leaders, um, who corporatists who care about the community and that then we have those who are abusing it. But those who are abusing it are particularly egregious, and we need to recognize what the source of the problem is, not blame a system, right? It's just, you know, um, anyway, yeah. Thanks, Lou. Appreciate it.
If everybody can unmute. See.
And Gisela just added Homo species emerged in Africa around 300,000 years ago.
Oh, longer than that. Oh, longer than that. Yes, but she's right. That's where our species emerges. Absolutely correct.
Yeah.
If everybody can unmute and give Sal one applause for this exciting course.
Thanks, Sal.
Thanks, Sal.
Thanks, Al.
Thank you, everyone, for
Thank you.
participating.
Thank you.
I hope this has made some sense today.
Oh, yeah.
Great presentation.
It was
Thank you.
Thank you, Sal.
Bye all.
good review.
Thanks,
good
Bob.
review.
Good to see you.
Good seeing you too.
Take care, Sal.